Palestinians are not unique in their freedom struggle. They're not the first, they're not the last. It happens to be in a particular historical moment. It remains one of the last outstanding agenda items on an anti-colonial agenda. And so it's anachronistic. That's what makes it so unique. Israel is an imperial imposition on the Middle East. It is an imperial imposition that was ushered through the patronage of the United Kingdom, and obviously with the patronage of the French, has been now upheld by the United States, but nobody consulted us.
Yeah.
And so everyone, all Arab communities have been paying the price of this imposition, and our opposition to this kind of force has been framed as anti-Semitic. And I just want to say something about this, because it's missing. We haven't had time to have this as a part of the conversation. But so much of the United States' commitment to equating the battle against anti-Semitism with the protection of Israel is a way to then protect itself and to avoid the discussion of anti-Semitism as an outcome and a derivative of white supremacy. The Holocaust is the manifestation of the idea of a European man to which Jewish people could not belong. Therefore, they were denied citizenship. They were considered Oriental. They were considered backward, too religious, too dirty, right? The idea of emancipation was the idea of citizenship for Jewish people, because they could not become unless they completely assimilated. Otherwise, they were exogenous. This entire conversation of anti-Semitism and its relationship to white supremacy is then obfuscated and avoided by making the conversation about Israel, where now we then frame the resistance to the political project of an exclusive Jewish Zionist state, right, which is a political project. Now that gets transformed into an Islamophobic narrative about the rejection of Jews, primordial hatred.
Right.
And what it does is it just absolves us of an honest conversation about white supremacy.
It's funny because it's such an anti-Semitic stereotype to conflate Jewish identity with like blind support of Israel, right? That's the other part of it that no one really wants to talk about. It's like, no, don't put that on us. Like, there's a difference between political ideology, us being Jews, but that's something that the dual loyalty stuff, all of that is part of the same anti-Semitic package.
We're just not having an honest conversation, and instead it's Palestinians and Arabs who are made to pay the price for white supremacy. What are we supposed to do? We know Palestinians get this message loud and clear. We're to do nothing. We're to surrender. We're to accept that we are going to be history's sacrificial lambs in order to make up for an anti-Semitic project born in Europe. And that's what we're resisting. We're fighting for our lives. It could have been anybody that now is occupying us and subjecting us to an apartheid regime. It happens to become complicated because of this discomfort, which I'm not surprised by. I teach undergraduate students at Rutgers University in the Africana Studies and Program and Criminal Justice Department. Do you know how uncomfortable it is for these students to talk about racism?
Right.
It's like a private issue. They can't talk about it because racism in the United States is framed as a colorblind movement. And so in order to be anti-racist, you have to pretend like race doesn't exist. So you don't even have the language for it. So imagine how uncomfortable people are talking about anti-Semitism. Imagine how uncomfortable they are talking about Palestinian rights. That's been equated with this form, and you don't, because you don't see the people, you don't see their faces. I was just watching CNN's breaking news. There are 41 children dead in Gaza right now. There are children, babies being pulled out from under rubble. And CNN showed a message from Bibi Netanyahu explaining that they struck terrorists, and then moved to the correspondent in Tel Aviv talking about the trauma of the sirens going off, and that now the sirens are less than they were before. Why are we surprised that nobody has the language to talk about this? So much of the work that we do, right, and have been doing, and I think that we've been doing well, is listen to us.
Yeah.
See us. We don't need to be alongside, I'm in the academy for so long. In order for me to speak, I had to have a Jewish counterpart to then verify, yeah, right. She's not lying. She's not lying. I wasn't lying in the first place.
Right. For your non-anti-Semitism.
I'm not burdened by that because I have a commitment to all of our liberation. It's Muhammad al-Kurd said it so beautifully when he said they chant death to Arabs, we chant we want freedom. That should tell you everything you need to know, right? They want to turn Gaza into a parking lot. They want to mark our homes in order to attack people in their homes because they are Palestinian. They want us to surrender, that we don't belong to this land. And our message is, we belong. You can stay too. You just can't be our masters. That's the extent of our demand, that you cannot be our masters. The extent of their demand is death and disappearance. This is a people uprising for freedom. There's nothing complicated about that. It's a stateless people that's been bifurcated, ghettoized, put in an open air prison, subject to systematic war by the only nuclear power in the Middle East and the 11th most military power in the world, most significant military power in the world, backed by the United States. It's not really that complicated, right? Unless you don't want to be burdened with the responsibility, unless this is too much of a high price for you to pay. And so you'll watch Palestinians die and then write about it or lament about it later, commemorate them when it's no longer an issue. But the project has been clear. I mean, the project is to basically make sure that Palestinians cannot be sovereigns and cannot belong in their own land. And that's been done through a series of processes. Through, in the Gaza Strip, it's war and siege. Within Israel, it's using civil law in order to subjugate a people who are still subject to an emergency law regime. In Jerusalem, it's administrative law. In the West Bank, it's occupation, it's martial law. It's the separation of Palestinians. And of course, in the diaspora, right, Palestinian refugees, it's the divide and conquer so that we're not a single nation. And instead, what they want to give us and what they made clear in the Oslo Accords, I mean, we can dissect this, I know we don't have time, but in the Oslo Accords, they made clear that the horizon for Palestinians is basically autonomy. Autonomy is a form of derivative sovereignty that we understand well in the United States, which is a settler colony. They're reservations. They want to place us in reservations, or what would be the equivalent of black homelands, Bantustans, where we exercise some limited autonomy over our lives, but that we are subject to the sovereignty of the settler colony. That is the end game. That has been articulated over and over again. Netanyahu has said it. His government has said it. We have evidence that it's been being said for 73 years. The rejection of not wanting to deal with that comes with what I was mentioning earlier, of just not wanting to bear the responsibility of this moment. And so Palestinians become, humanity's sacrifice in order not to deal with this question.
The idea is that they'll just be killed and or leave, go to Jordan, go to other countries. Is that the kind of the fantasy?
Oh yeah, they say go to Jordan, go to 22 other Arab countries, right, or stay, but just stay as Arabs, right? Stay as like a minority population. And that's a form of genocide. Native Americans in the United States, if you notice, Native Americans aren't a minority in the United States. They are an indigenous nation. They have entered into treaties with the United States because they are a juridical people. Right. They're not a minority. The fight in Hawaii, for example, which is occupied territory, amongst Hawaiians is between whether or not Hawaiians should be registered as indigenous peoples or they should be registered as, an occupied territory to fight for their own state. Now they're the Kanaka Maoli. They are indigenous, but once they enter into the Bureau of the Interior of the United States, they're going to be subject to the same kinds of territorial takings and subjugations. I mean, here I just want to emphasize Palestine is not unique. We're certainly not the only settler colony. What makes us unique is the fact that, one, we're fighting back. Mm-hmm. Two, that our settler counterpart happens to be framed as victim, a perennial victim.
Right.
Three, We are not, not in Algeria, there was a majority. It was an indigenous majority, and in South Africa, it was an indigenous majority. We are equal in numbers, and our population is also spread in diaspora. So there are significant distinctions. It's not that we're special, right? It just, these are certain circumstances that bring it to the fore, and we happen to be the U.S.'s self-proclaimed most significant ally in the Middle East because of a continuing interest in penetrating the Middle East for influence. I mean, the U.S. is in Yemen. The U.S. is still in Iraq. The U.S. is in Afghanistan. The U.S. is in Syria. The U.S. is funding counter-revolution in Egypt. This is part of that matrix. It's about U.S. hegemony. Before we leave, there's somebody is asking a question about white supremacist support for Palestinians. That's not true. Richard Spencer has made clear that he sees Israel as the future of, as a model for European sovereignty. So do the Hindutva movement in India, Modi's followers, who are also supportive of Hindu nationalism. What they all have in common, right, is that they want to discriminate and exclude and be a chauvinist nation, right, as a matter of right. We condemn this everywhere else. But white supremacists, Hindutvas, Jewish Zionists want to claim that mantle of exclusion and discrimination as a righteous matter. And so Richard Spencer is not with us.
And David Duke, I think they put that name in there too. To the extent, I mean, he's a raging anti-Semite. So to the extent that I've never heard him express solidarity with Palestinians or Arabs. But if he ever did that, it would be totally disingenuous.
He might have in the past. And I, as a person who has been in movement for now over 20 years, we have rejected any association, because our project is not a nationalist project. Right. Our project is a liberationist project. It's a liberation for all people. When Israel frames the equation and the future of Israel, it's a mutually exclusive project. Israel is if Palestinians are not. If Palestinians are, Israel is not. The reverse is not true. If Palestinians are, Jews can still be, and they can still remain. They just can't remain as masters, that the land only belongs to them. And so we've invited people to join our struggle. I do think that this is a bit of a turning point, because we're shattering some taboos, a lot because of Palestinian sacrifice, but also a lot because of Israel's transgressions. They have had no holds barred. Nobody can watch that and remain silent.